Classical mythologies have shaped the very world we live in.
Yeah, whatever. I don't have time for dense, dusty old books, Paul.
Great. Well, that's what podcasts are for.
Oh, good point.
Join me, Paul, as I teach my best friend and improv comedy partner, Sarah, all about mythology on Myth Understood.
Mythology is frequently explicit, obscene, violent, and bizarre, though, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to joke about and improvise along the way?
Yes.
Oh.
So come for the mythology and stay for the absurdity on Myth Understood.
Available now at mythunderstoodpodcast.com and your podcast platform of choice.
It's Myth Understood.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers, to another wonderful episode of your favorite Shakespeare Authorship Podcast, Don't Quill the Messenger. Before I welcome our guest for this episode, I'd like to conduct a little bit of business and start by saying how exciting it is to our team whenever we receive a notice that one of you has selected a patron level at our Patreon account. Even as little as $5 per month helps us get to our goal. And of all the podcasts out there to choose from, we thank you for choosing us as one of your favorites. If you haven't signed up yet, what are you waiting for? Head on over to don'tquillthepodcast.com, click the Patreon link to see a variety of exclusive perks available only to patrons, including that growing list of monthly bonus features. You'll learn more about this month's bonus feature later in this episode. Bonus features usually drop around the middle of the month, so watch for that. Don't forget that every patron is entered into the Quiller of the Month contest, and our monthly winner receives an item of their choosing from the Quiller Swag Shop and a shout out on the show. We will also announce this month's winner later in this episode. What an exciting episode. So much going on. But right now, let's go ask some questions. My guest today returns to the program to discuss his further work. Most of you will remember him from a previous episode where we discussed his operatic creations. And today we welcome back Daniel Stephen Crafts to the program. Daniel is an Emmy-winning composer who wrote for legendary opera star Jerry Hadley until Hadley's tragic death in 2007. Their first collaboration, a setting of poetry by Carl Sandburg titled The Song and the Slogan, premiered in 2000 and was made into a television program for PBS hosted by David Hartman, and that is where Daniel won his Emmy Award. You can find the program on YouTube if you would like to view it. As we spoke about in our previous episode together, Daniel is also the creator of the opera genre known as gonzo opera, combining classically trained voices with social political satire. And you can learn more about that at gonzoopera.com. Daniel's other work has been recorded by both the Kyiv and the Czech Philharmonics, as well as the Prague Radio Symphony and Chorus. He has received commissions from the Berkeley Symphony Orchestra, the Northwest Symphony, and the New Mexico Symphony Orchestra. And to date, he has completed 21 operas, 17 symphonies, 6 concertos, and 15 large orchestral works, as well as a variety of shorter pieces. Besides his Emmy, his work has received awards from the National Endowment for the Arts and numerous awards from ASCAP. He is currently working on his Symphony Number 17. I'm sure a very symbolic number for our fellow Quillers, Oxfordian listeners. He is calling it the Oxford Symphony. The second movement is a setting of Sonnet Number 72, Let My Name Be Buried Where My Body Is. He is also the writer and composer of a musical monodrama titled Bury My Name, which tells the Oxfordian story through the eyes and mouth of the Glover's son from Stratford, which is what we're going to talk about today. Daniel, welcome back.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and it's great to be back talking with you.
Well, it's great to have a guest such as yourself with so many accolades and such a prestigious and eclectic body of work behind you.
Well, I've been doing it for a long time. So,
You have written a lot of work. And so my first question to you is, Bury My Name, which I classify as a monodrama because it does only include one character in the script. Is that your only monodrama?
no, actually, I've done a couple of works for narrator and orchestra, formerly like Peter and the Wolf, but on other subjects, of course.
So this would, just out of curiosity, what other subjects would inspire you to write a monodrama?
Well, the first one is called Otter's Odd Adventure, and it's the story of an otter, the universal symbol of play, who gets trapped in a modern shopping mall and can't make heads or tails out of all the strange behavior of all the humans. It's a satire on consumer culture.
Nice. You really love your social and political satire, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the two things that I love the most, Stephen, are social political satire and beautiful voices. And that's why the Gonzo Opera Project was it seemed that my whole life was leading to just that.
Well, I know that was a very fun episode when we recorded that episode, and I've received so many comments from listeners out there who also really enjoyed that episode. And if you are listening, fellow Quillers, and you haven't heard it, you can go back into the Don't Quill the Messenger archives on the don'tquillthepodcast.com website, and you can find that episode featuring Daniel. But today we're going to talk about Bury My Name, this monodrama featuring Shakespeare of Stratford. Now, of course, my first question is, why a monodrama to bring light to Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, as the true Shakespeare? And why from the perspective of Shakespeare of Stratford?
Well, now, though I'm not a researcher, and I have the greatest respect and appreciation for those who have, especially in recent times, made such remarkable discoveries, I've been a student of the authorship question for decades. A few years ago, I thought I might turn this hobby of mine into something more substantial. I had already done a setting for baritone and orchestra of the so-called mad scenes from King Lear, and I had done a song cycle of 6 of the early poems published under the name of Edward de Vere. So I had already done some setting of Shakespeare, but I wanted to do something more, something on the authorship question. From the beginning, I conceived it as a one-man show combining monologue and music, but I quickly realized that this would be a Herculean task for any one person. And for the music, of course, I needed at least a pianist. So I ended up dividing the work into two, partly for actor and partly for baritone, with a pianist accompanying the baritone. I envisioned both of them being dressed exactly alike in the costume of the traditional looking Shakespeare, and the lights would go up on either one depending on who was speaking or singing. And the idea was to tell the story of the authorship subterfuge, but in a humorous way, put in as many jokes as I possibly could. The great challenge was to keep the story interesting without overloading the listener with too many facts and figures. And that, as you well know, is a huge challenge, because the one thing we can all say for certain is that this is a really complicated story. And that always puts us at a disadvantage. But, that's reality. A good story has a clean narrative with clear motivations. Reality just isn't like that. Not at all. Reality is messy, full of stops and starts and dead ends, false beginnings, often illogical motivations. And this story, the authorship story, is full of those things in spades. So anyway, I set out to tell the story in as entertaining a fashion as possible. And while I've stayed within the bounds of known facts, a few interpolations were necessary to move the story along, but I wanted those interpolations to be consistent with known facts. In fact, I even consulted with the excellent biographer Mark Anderson on a couple of points. He was kind enough to take time to tell me that, yes, both speculations were perfectly in keeping with what we actually know of the story. But it has always been my intention to revise the text whenever any new information came to light or whenever I thought of any more jokes. So while the music may be, the text is not written in stone. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm always willing to revise it or revamp it in any way according to any new facts that come to light.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things, I'm familiar with, being an actor and a producer and director, I'm very familiar with a lot of the work that is out there when it comes to monodrama. I have some of my own favorites. Darrow is a great one about Clarence Darrow and his life. John Barrymore, there's a wonderful script that was made very popular by Christopher Plummer.
Yes,
performing
I have
the role
that. Yes,
of Barrymore. Yes. There's a Lincoln one that I've always thought that I might do because I am 6'4", but I'm not sure I want to grow the proper facial hair to make it happen. Although I do have a very prominent nose, so I could possibly pull off a Lincoln. There's a great one, Al Capone, and but again, I would have to shrink about a foot and put on about 100 pounds to play Al Capone. But
that would be dedication.
Yes, shrinking the foot would be really the challenge, I'm sure. One of the things that I have found in many of the more intriguing and successful monodramas is that they include moments when the character relives incidents from their past, often speaking to or reacting to unseen characters on the stage, having one-sided conversations even. Is there any thought of possibly including something like that? Perhaps even a conjectured meeting with De Vere or anything of that nature that sort of introduces other characters without introducing other actors?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. He talks about a number of other characters. He talks briefly about meeting De Vere, and he has some great things to say about Ben Jonson, who even after 400 years, he still hates Johnson's guts for any number of reasons. You asked me why I cast it in Shakespeare's voice.
Yes.
Well, I would not think of presuming to put words into the mouth of Edward de Vere, his ghost or otherwise. That for obvious reasons, I think. But I'm perfectly happy to put words into the mouth of the man from Stratford. Now, in the work, what I hope will become immediately understood is that this is Shakespeare's ghost who's been around since his death and is speaking to us today. He's an omniscient presence who knows everything that we know, and of course a good deal more. He knows exactly what happened in the authorship cover-up. His character has mellowed during the last 400 years. He realizes he wasn't exactly the nicest person. If we remember, he was constantly suing people for small amounts of money. He even threatened the life of someone in London. He was deemed a wicked person by the Stratford Town Council for holding grain during a famine. And he regrets that he was not such a good person at the time. But he still finds he has some problems with some of the things that happened. One point, he still considers Ben Jonson his mortal, if you will, enemy. Shakespeare, as you'll remember, applied for and received a coat of arms, though we know he bribed the official, which bore the motto, "Not without right." Well, Johnson, in his play Every Man Out of Humor, lampoons this as not without mustard. And Shakespeare, 400 years later, is still livid about the insult. And he makes a number of caustic comments about people at the time. He's reformed, but not entirely. But above all, he finds it immensely ironic that the world thinks him the greatest English writer, but he's perfectly happy with that situation.
You know, that calls to mind the Taming of the Shrew, where, you know, you have this very interesting prologue beginning with Sly and the lord that he becomes in his drunken slumber. And then, you know, really, the Taming of the Shrew is technically a play within a play in a lot of ways. It's hardly ever produced that way. Those prologue scenes tend to be cut by most producers who put on the production, including myself, I have to admit, because it just confuses and convolutes the audience unless they are Shakespeare authorship, you know, schooled. But there is a funny moment back at Petruchio's house where Kate is starving and Grumio, the servant, is, you know, tempting her with food, and he says, how about some pancakes with mustard? And she says, that would be awesome. And he says, but the mustard is too hot a little, I think. And she says, well, then leave the mustard and just bring me the pancakes. And he says, no, you don't get no pancakes of me without the mustard. So how about just the mustard? And I'm wondering now if maybe there's a little connection there to Johnson's lampooning of Shakespeare, and if Edward de Vere isn't sort of capitalizing on that as well.
You know, I wouldn't be at all surprised. By the way, that prologue that you mentioned, that's one of the things that I set to music in the piece. The speech by the Lord about, let's set this beggar up as an honorable person and see what fun we can have of this. Yes, it's almost always cut in live presentations of it. So I definitely wanted to get that into the piece.
Well, you know, and not to get too much on a tangent, but that scene is so reflective of moments in the text of Cervantes' Don Quixote, where you have the Duke and the Duchess who are creating these false fantasies and indulging Don Quixote's madness for their own entertainment. And so you can look at that and go, okay, well, in my mind, Edward de Vere was influenced or inspired by Cervantes, which we can find evidence that de Vere would have had access to Cervantes and most likely have read Cervantes. However, we don't have any proof that Shakespeare ever even owned a book. And you made a comment earlier about you would much rather put words into Shakespeare's mouth than to put into Edward's mouth. But the interesting irony of that is we have no evidence anywhere in the record from any time of anything that Shakespeare actually ever said, because he never wrote anything down because he probably couldn't write.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah. Interesting to your Cervantes point, Mark Anderson speculates that de Vere was in one of the cities in Italy at the same time as Cervantes when de Vere made that challenge in combat to any comer. And Mark Anderson speculates that perhaps Cervantes took de Vere as his model for part of Don Quixote.
So here you have two writers stealing from each other, perhaps even.
It could well be. It could well be. It was perfectly possible.
Well, I happen to be rehearsing
an idea of the actual writer of Shakespeare as being the prototype for Don Quixote.
As we record this episode, I am in the middle of rehearsals. In fact, about to go into Tech Week. I'll be playing the title role of Don Quixote in a stage adaptation of Don Quixote, which is why it's so fresh in my mind right now.
Sure. Very good.
Yeah. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is, I have seen, talking about monodramas, I've seen the enhancement of monodrama through elements such as recorded music tracks, projected visuals. There's a great one about Van Gogh, and it of course includes projected visuals of his paintings while he's discussing his life. There are even some that have voices from the tech booth, such as Barrymore. There is a character, it's like a stage manager character who speaks from the booth in that play, even though you never see that character on stage. There's a similar convention in the Lincoln piece that I was discussing a moment ago, but I'm not certain I've seen anything like what you've created here through musical composition and these baritone vocals.
Yeah, this is completely low tech. There's no recording involved in this. It's all done live on stage. I think one thing from an actor's point of view, breaking up a long monologue is always welcome, as I'm sure you'll agree.
Yes.
It's interspersing speech and song has a very long tradition. It actually even goes back to, that's what Greek drama was. The chorus was sung and other parts were spoken. So it would go back and forth between music and monologue. In modern times, one can think back to Carl Sandburg. During the Depression, Sandburg would travel around the country making political speeches on behalf of working people. But he would intersperse the politics with folk songs. And that made the message go down so much easier. And indeed, it was this tradition that gave rise to people like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, and even later Bob Dylan. So the form of speech and song has a ripe history, long history. And by trade, I'm a composer first and foremost. And as I say, I had already set bits of King Lear and some of the early De Vere poems and that. So it seemed like a logical thing to do at that point. And I'm hoping that the text comments on the music and the music comments on the text as they go back and forth.
Now, you've suggested that this is designed for what would be three entertainers working in collaboration, right? The actor speaking the spoken word, the baritone doing the vocals, and a piano accompaniment. Could you not have one performer deliver the spoken word and the vocals if they were, what we call a triple threat in the entertainment industry?
Well, that's what I had thought of originally. But as I got into it, I thought it's a whole lot of memorization. And most opera singers are not really trained so much in that, unless you're a Wagnerian and you really can memorize a huge music drama by Wagner. I think it would be really difficult to find somebody who could pull off the whole thing. I think it'd be so much easier with an actor and a baritone sharing the stage back and forth.
How did you choose the songs and the themes for the musical aspects of the piece?
Based on what just came to mind from telling the story, what seemed to illustrate the points in the story that I was making. I've used, of course, passages from the plays, both familiar Shakespeare, long passages, short songs, and finally one of the sonnets, and unfamiliar Shakespeare. One wonderful passage from the Book of Thomas More, which I think virtually everybody agrees that Shakespeare, whoever he was, wrote at least part of it. And I carry around this speech from Thomas More. I have it in my wallet, and I love to read it to people. And if you wouldn't mind, I read it for you now. It's
of course,
fairly
please.
short.
No, we'd love to hear.
At the time, At the time that the play takes place, there are riots in London. The townspeople are up against immigrants. They're ready to go the Elizabethan version of packy bashing at the time. And according to history, Sir Thomas More stepped forward and gave an oratory that quelled the crowd. And this is Shakespeare's version of what Thomas More said to the crowd at that time. Imagine that you see the wretched strangers, their babies at their backs, with their poor luggage, plodding to the ports and coasts for transportation, and that you sit as kings in your desires, authority quite silenced by your brawl. And you, in ruff of your opinions clothed, what had you got? I'll tell you. You had taught how insolence and strong hand should prevail, how order should be quelled, and by this pattern, not one of you should live an aged man. For other ruffians, as their fancies wrought, with self-same hand, self-reasons, and self-right, would shark on you, and men like ravenous fishes would feed on one another. That, to me, symbolizes Shakespeare's humanity every bit as much as Portia's mercy speech
The
does.
quality of mercy. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it's such a beautiful speech, and I have no problem believing that Shakespeare wrote that wonderful speech, if not the whole rest of the play, for that matter.
That's very interesting. It's also very timely in today's. Well, it's timeless.
Exactly,
is what it is.
Exactly.
But, it's probably, you could go to just about any decade or era, and it would be timely in one way or another.
Unfortunately, so. I think you're exactly right.
I love that imagery, though, and that phrasing to shark upon you and like ravenous fishes feed upon one another.
Yes. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah. Only he could come up with a beautiful image like that.
And only somebody who had sailed the seas and knew what a shark really was, I think, could possibly, or who had seen something of the nature of an animal that had died in the ocean and the way that the fish come and sort of swarm around it and pick it to pieces,
Very good, Stephen. I hadn't thought of that. That's exactly right.
If you haven't witnessed something like that, how could you create that kind of imagery in written word?
Right. Yeah, most Londoners, the water that they had seen would probably be the Thames and maybe nothing beyond that. Yeah, this is just somebody who'd seen the ocean.
Absolutely. It had to be.
Very good. Yeah.
And deep water too, in order to have witnessed anything like that. So yeah, I mean, that would certainly fit our guy, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Pirates and all.
Absolutely.
So, bury my name. What do you figure? I've read through the text, but it didn't have recordings of the music. You obviously didn't have that to supply. But I read through the text. I didn't have a chance to look at lyrics. But what do you figure the runtime is of the piece?
Well, 2 acts. It would be in 2 acts, maybe 45 minutes each, something like that.
Okay, so a standard runtime of most regular plays is approximately 1 hour and 45 to 2 hours long with an intermission.
Yeah, I think that would probably do it.
And has the work ever been produced or presented anywhere?
Well, I have read the text myself to groups of friends. I can make them laugh with it.
That's important.
So it is, because that's, you can get groups of friends to tell you anything you want to hear, but laughter is involuntary. So if you can make people laugh, that's genuine. So that's, it's gone over very well a couple of times that I've read it.
I often get groups of friends together. I'm capable of getting groups of friends together to tell me that I should direct a play, and then they often regret it.
Well, I don't know. Stephen, I was wondering if you would have any interest yourself in playing the character of Shakespeare. Now, I've never had the privilege of seeing you on stage, but I have heard you act a couple of times on these podcasts, and you're very good. And I know you have a great sense of humor, and certainly you know the material backwards and forwards. I would think you would be an ideal person to do the monologue part of it if you had any interest in it.
Well, and one of the reasons I had a feeling that this topic was going to come up at some point today. And one of the reasons why I asked you about the idea of someone doing both is I do happen to sing I think a very rich baritone when I need it. So I was curious about that. I don't have any formal opera training. I do have some formal vocal training, and I have appeared in a couple of operas in my time, but
really?
Oh yeah. The very first one I did was La Fanciulla del West.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? What
Puccini?
Part? No. What part in the opera?
I was in the chorus, and I was 19 at the time, so this is many, many years ago. And it was at a facility called the Redlands Bowl, which is where I actually had my Shakespeare festival for about a decade back in the day. I was in La Fanciulla. This is a funny story because, La Fanciulla is set in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and they're frozen in, they're snowed in. It's a terrible snowstorm. And here we were in the middle of August in Southern California, performing La Fanciulla, bundled up in these heavy coats and trench coats and scarves and mittens and hats, sweating our skin off and dehydrating right before the eyes of the audience while trying to sing Puccini. It was really a ridiculous idea, but we did it.
Well, that's getting into character for sure.
Yeah, that's a true story. I felt like Morales in a chorus line. Be the ice cream cone. Yeah, well, when you're from Puerto Rico, it's not so easy to imagine, feeling the snow flurries of a bobsled. Well, that was the mindset we were all in. So here we are, it's 100+ degrees out on a concrete stage, and pretending we were freezing in the Sierra Nevadas. So that was my very first exposure to opera.
Well, you'd have a chance to do the so-called mad scenes from King Lear: blow winds and crack your cheeks, rage below. So it's another climate disaster in that.
Yeah, and there's another reflection upon Don Quixote too, right? Like there's Lear, who is mad through the great bulk of this play. Then there's this tremendous storm, this huge occurrence that occurs that suddenly snaps him back to reality. And
yes.
then and that's the climax of the play. And now, it's the denouement occurring, and we unravel the knot. And he, of course, has his tragic death in the end, but not before one final heartbreak, with the death of Cordelia. But it's a very similar character arc, isn't it? It's a very similar path that these men go on in this journey.
Well, it's interesting that they're referred to as the mad scenes, but in a way, it's Lear actually finally coming to reality.
It is.
He's been mad otherwise. He's certainly mad in the beginning when he asks the daughters to tell him how much they love him. I mean, that's pretty crazy. But finally, it's only in the mad scenes that he really realizes what's actually going on. And the one thing that really caused me to want to set it to music is, again, just the tremendous humanity that Shakespeare shows, where Lear finally realizing what's happening, where he says, "Poor naked wretches, whosoe'er you are, that bide the pelting of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, your looped and windowed raggedness defend you from seasons such as these? Oh, I have ta'en too little care of this. Take physic, pomp, expose thyself to feel what wretches feel, that thou mayst shake the superflux to them." It's finally he's realized, I was king. I could have helped these poor people. Why didn't I do that? I'm realizing now what a terrible king I was. And it's just that sense of humanity that really, really impresses me, and that I really wanted to set to music.
You know, I've always had the idea that Lear is one of the 37 that I have not done. I have produced and directed 24 of the Shakespeare titles, many of them multiple times. In fact, Midsummer Night's Dream, I'm going on my just completing my 10th production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. But Lear is one that is on my list, of course, to get to eventually, but you can't really do a Lear without a Lear. It's like,
exactly,
no one ever adds Hamlet to their season unless they already know exactly who is going to play Hamlet, because that's a terrible idea. Otherwise, it's the same with Lear.
It's a tour de force part. It is in acting the same as, say, Siegfried is in opera, in Wagner's music drama. I mean, to sing Siegfried, you have to be Superman. And just to do King Lear, just the length of it, not to mention the emotional intensity, you really have to be a Superman to be able to pull it off.
And you have to be a Superman at 80 years old. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be 80 years old to play Lear, though he does say he is 80 years. Right. But, you've got to be close. You got to be somewhere up there, at least, I would say over 60, or it becomes very difficult to be believable as a man of that age who, in my opinion, is the first written, recorded Alzheimer's victim, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, there have been so many actors who've said that it destroyed them. Doing it really just destroyed them. So it's something you don't want to take on casually.
No, well, I tell you, that when I played Iago once, and that nearly killed me. That role is so sizable. It is deceivingly large and deceivingly difficult to play. It's second to Hamlet. And then I played Hamlet, and I had to do it twice, 2 years in a row, just to get it right. Because that's, you want to talk about Herculean feat. I still believe that the Hamlet we know, like from the folio, was never actually performed by any actor of that day or that time. I think Quarto 1, Quarto 2 were probably performed live, and even then probably cut down and edited. But I don't believe that the first folio is an acting edition. I believe that is a for posterity version of the play.
I think you're exactly right in that, because it's so long, it's really beyond the endurance of an actor's physicality. But he wanted to make sure that in the final version, he got in everything that he wanted to say, as you say, for posterity.
I agree. And so I'm not so sure. My jury's a little bit out on Lear, in the sense that it's not as large, but it's definitely it's not as large like line load, but it's definitely as large, or if not even more emotionally demanding than Hamlet. And at an age where actors start to have difficulty remembering that kind of line load. I've worked with literally thousands of actors now in my career as both a producer, director, and as an actor, and actors of every age, from 5-year-olds all the way to 80-year-olds. And I can tell you that there is truth and there is a true legitimacy to the fact that around 60 to 65, actors start to have real difficulty remembering larger Shakespearean roles, keeping tabs on that kind of line load, and it just continues to slack from there on, moving on.
Oh, I have no doubt that's true.
I have my own personal fears that I would like to play Lear someday, but I have my own personal fears that by the time I'm old enough to play Lear, I will be too old to play Lear. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine once said, and I think this is really true, this is something written by someone who descended into the blackest of black and came back to tell us about it. And I think that's really true. But I think in order to play the part, you would probably have to descend into some degree of that madness yourself. And that's a lot to ask. What does that do to somebody, you know?
You know, I also have always thought, I was about to mention this and got on my own little tangent there, but I always thought that it would be an awesome production. I don't know that it's humanly possible, but it would be an awesome production if the actor playing Lear also was the fool, and the fool is an imaginary friend of Lear.
Yeah. That would certainly work. How exactly you pull it off, I'm not sure, but that certainly would work because he's the conscience of Lear.
Yes, he is. And, you know, and trust me, because I've examined this, there are only 2 instances in the text where other characters actually refer to the fool, like address the fool directly. Mm-hmm. And those could easily be played as those characters are placating Lear by addressing his alter ego. And then one of the things that you notice, and a lot of directors have had difficulty with this, and I've even seen it, there are even film versions where they have a murder scene where the fool is murdered. There's a famous film version where they hang the fool, which is nowhere in the text at all, by the way. The fool just disappears. The storm happens and the fool disappears, ironically, coincidentally, right as Lear regains his lucidity. So that lends more to the idea that the fool is a product of his madness, a product of his imagination, and not a real life character.
Yeah, I like that. I like that very much indeed.
Do you want to know what that line load would be, though? Not to mention, you'd have to have an actor who could, on stage before our eyes, switch physicalities in talking to himself. Like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe that could be done as a recording to play, you know, in echo or something like that, as he thinks to himself.
I guess I'll have to become a filmmaker because it'd be a lot easier to do on film than it would be to do live on stage.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea for something to do it as a film. Yes.
Now, switching gears for a bit here, back to opera and composing. A lot of Shakespeare has for a very long time been the source of inspiration for many artists in many ways. You know, one of the most beautiful ballets I've ever seen is Romeo and Juliet. Yes. It's a fantastic ballet, and it's so beautiful if you've got real skilled dancers. I was fortunate enough to see the Tolstoy version. No, wait a minute. What am I saying? The
Bolshoi.
Thank you. Bolshoi Tolstoy. Wow. There's a literary reference that has nothing to do with anything we were talking about. The Bolshoi Ballet out of Moscow. I saw them at the Amundsen Theater in LA do Romeo and Juliet. And it was such a beautiful, beautiful performance. It's so moving. But also, Shakespeare has been the source of many inspired operas. But I don't believe that Lear is one of them. Have you thought about completing a full opera version of Lear?
I think there was one done, and it was terrible because it was all in that dissonant style. I mean, if you can imagine, 3 hours of music that sounds like it's all wrong notes, and Lear singing stuff that has no melody to it whatsoever. I think there was done like that, but no.
No, I would not be interested in that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you definitely want to stay away as far as you can from that. Well, I'm such a big proponent of melody. I believe, especially in opera, if you don't have strong, clear melody, you don't have an opera. How much Lear would really lend itself to melody, I'm really not sure. And actually, that's a lot of my criticism of some of the operas, especially the Italian versions of Shakespeare. I'm not really impressed with them all that much. I have thought about it, but I don't know if I could make it work.
I've seen Verdi's Othello, the film version starring Domingo.
That's as good as it gets.
I think you're right. And that's a very, that's a good version. And those of you who are listening, if you want to go dabble into a taste of some Shakespearean opera, I would say that's definitely one to see. I have not seen the Macbeth.
Oh, don't see it. If you can imagine Macbeth set to Pa music.
Oh no, that would be terrible.
Yeah, it is. I know opera fans will hate me for that, but I just, I'm not impressed with it at all.
Well, I trust
anyway,
you. Look, you're an Emmy-winning composer, so I trust your opinion more than mine. The other, let's see, Falstaff. It's not technically a Shakespeare play, but it's all of the Falstaff scenes, sort of like Chimes at Midnight, sort of set to music.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I much prefer. Yeah. Chimes at Midnight. I love that movie. Orson Welles is the perfect Falstaff. I've always been very impressed with that. And I was very happy to finally get a DVD copy of that.
I feel like later in life, Orson Welles tried to be Falstaff.
I think he did.
Yeah.
I think he did. Yeah.
And then unfortunately he, I think what a lot of younger people remember him for is those terrible wine commercials.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't remember the brand,
money, I think, but
yeah, I don't remember the name of the brand, but I remember it was, the slogan was, "We will serve no wine before it's time."
There were many parodies done of that.
Yes.
as it went on.
Do you have a favorite at all? Do you have do you have a Shakespearean opera that you would say is the one you think is the best of them all?
I would say the Prokofiev ballet Romeo and Juliet that you mentioned.
Yeah. Well,
that would be my favorite setting of Shakespeare by anybody. Yeah.
But what about vocals?
I'm sorry. What about what?
What about vocals? What about actual opera? Because Prokofiev, that's the ballet.
Oh, right. Oh, not really. I'm somehow they just don't convey to me what the plays are all about. They may succeed in their own right, but it's a completely different experience altogether. So.
I think Much Ado About Nothing would make a great opera.
It could. I think there are many that could make good operas, depending on the librettist and the composer's vision of it for that.
It's got the great humorous elements to it, but then there are also some very dramatic moments to it. I think in my mind, it's one of the most perfect plays ever written because of its combination of all of the drama and the humor that you find in that play, as well as the richness and strength of the characters that are represented there. But, I could imagine Benedict singing a funny operatic song about how he'll never get married and how women are terrible, and then Beatrice singing, her own version of a similar, and they could even, you could even turn that into a duet of some sort, like sort of a fugue even, which would be really interesting.
There is an opera, I forget it, on that by Berlioz, actually, where he takes bits and pieces. The problem is, unless you're going to set the Shakespeare word for word, you'd need a librettist to convert it into a libretto, into singable language. And that gets into all kinds of problems. And I've many times I'm not happy with the solutions that people have come up with in that regard. So that's in this piece. I've taken no liberties whatsoever. I've set exactly the Shakespeare words, not changing anything at all. And I find it in many ways setting iambic pentameter is a challenge, but it's a very good challenge. It breaks you from 4/4 patterns immediately because you're working with 5, but it allows you to do all sorts of different things, and it's always challenging. So I found it very interesting setting it to music. If I were ever to do a full opera, I would have I would want to use the actual Shakespeare language. But the thing is, it would be ungodly long, because what I've found is the relationship between spoken text and sung text in terms of length is about 3 or 4 to 1. So that a 15-minute play, for example, turns into a 50-minute opera.
That's very interesting to know. I would have put that math together, but it makes total sense. And that's very interesting to know. I'm intrigued by that now.
So unless you cut a Shakespeare play tremendously, you'd end up with a 7-8 hour production. And that's just not tenable for anybody.
It becomes Nicholas Nickleby.
Right.
That's a musical for listeners who aren't familiar with it. It's a Broadway musical, and it's like an 8-hour. You come and watch it over 3 nights. I think is the way it's designed to be performed. And I think the novelty of that made it more popular than the actual music or the content of the text of that particular show. Iceman Cometh, isn't that another one? Iceman Cometh is a straight play that's like 3 nights, and of course there's the Angels in America as well. That's like a 6-hour play, I want to say, over multiple nights.
Well, there's always Wagner's Ring, of course. That was the first that takes place over. It's four music dramas that take place over 4 nights. But to break a single Shakespeare play into 3 or 4 nights, I don't know how that would work.
I have to agree with you. Although there are many companies that will do, say, like Henry IV Part 1 on one night and Henry IV Part 2 on a second night and do those in a rotation. I've seen that happen.
Right.
Many companies will do them in sequential order year after year. So you do Henry IV Part 1 this season, and the next season it's Henry IV Part 2, and then the third season it's Henry V to complete the trifecta there. That's commonly done. So one of the things I wanted to get back to is because I'm so flattered by your suggestion that I should look into playing Shakespeare in your monodrama, Bury My Name.
I think you do a great job, Stephen. Because of the things I think you've got a great sense of humor, and the character needs to have a good sense of humor. Since I don't want to overload the audience with facts and figures, so you have to keep it light and keep the comedy coming, and I know you can do that. So I think that would be a really good fit.
It is a super heavy line load, though. I did read through the text, and it is a lot of text to memorize.
And I'm perfectly willing to take suggestions as far as cuts, revisions, anything like that. I always intended the text to be constantly under revision for whatever purpose, really. So if it's too long, that's fine. It could certainly be cut.
Well, we would have to have some further discussion about what it would look like to premiere this fabulous work. I would be honored to be involved in a world premiere of this brand new work, as it were.
Well, anything to tick off the Stratfordians.
Right. You know what? But I was going to say is, and here's some of my dry sense of humor coming out. Is somewhere deep in my bones, the idea of playing Shakespeare of Stratford kind of doesn't sit well with me.
Oh, really?
I don't know that I want to be that guy. I have such a vehement dislike for him that I don't know that I want to personify him in front of an audience.
Well, I understand that perfectly. That's why I created him as someone who's lived but existed another 400 years and has mellowed out a good deal in that time and has learned from his mistakes, at least to a certain degree. He's not now that character that he was back in the 16th century. Well, it's not the same man.
And I do have to admit that I do blame him for something that he is most likely blameless for, which is receiving credit for all of these works that do not belong to him. And I'm pretty convinced that he really had very little to do with that, if anything at all, and may not have even known while he was alive that he would end up being considered this way and have this notoriety.
Well, that's what I have him say in there, that it turned out one of the greatest ironies of history that I would become the greatest of all English writers. He still finds that just incomprehensible.
Yeah, well, so do I.
Well, there you go. You could pull that off perfectly.
Well, real quick before we wrap up, I wanted to touch just briefly on your Symphony number 17, the Oxford Symphony. I don't want to go into too much detail here because we're going to do a separate episode on the symphony that is going to be this month's bonus feature, which will include a recording of one of the movements from the symphony in the bonus feature. So listeners can look forward to that. But let's give them a little tease. Let's give them a little hint about what they can expect us to talk about in that bonus feature about Symphony number 17.
Well, for a long time, I've gone back and forth between writing opera and writing symphonies. And instead, I turn to the symphonic form when I'm between librettos. I have some wonderful people writing librettos for me, but sometimes I've finished one and the next one hasn't come in yet. So I turn to the symphonic form. And I did that earlier in the year, and I realized I really hadn't thought about it, but I realized, this next symphony is going to be number 17. 17. Now, where have I heard that number before? It just everything fell in place. This has got to be on the subject of the authorship question. So there are 4 movements of it, and the titles. I'll give you the titles of the movement. The first one is a line from Henry VI, Part 2, "A spirit raised from depth of underground." And the second movement from Taming of the Shrew, "While counterfeit supposes bleared thine eyne."
Mm-hmm.
And the third from As You Like It, the famous line, "You are not ipse, for I am he."
Yes.
Where perhaps De Vere is saying to Shakespeare, "Don't take credit. You're not the one. I'm the one." But then it ends on a very dark and somber note with that famous sonnet number 2, which has the line, "Let my name be buried where my body is." which is probably that is maybe one of the darkest lines in all of English literature, where he realizes this, that this is a fait accompli. I will never be given credit for these works. It's just not possible.
Well, and truth is that we do not know where that is. So if his name is buried where his body is, we don't know where his body is. So therefore we do not know where his name lies with him.
Right.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if someday somebody is, breaking ground somewhere in Hackney to build a shopping center, and they find a casket full of manuscripts and the corpse of Edward de Vere?
Well, that's always been the hope, to find the manuscripts anywhere. I know Alexander Waugh is completely convinced, and I think he has convinced me too, that de Vere is actually buried under the Shakespeare statue in Westminster Abbey. And I just wonder how long it will take. I know the Abbey is not going to let people to go in there and do a subsurface scan or anything. It requires very sophisticated equipment. But I just wonder how long it will be as technology, moves forward in leaps and bounds, till maybe you can, on your phone, you might have an app that allows you to do a subsurface scan. And just finding the fact that somebody is buried under that statue of Shakespeare in Westminster Abbey, I think would resolve the question once and for all.
I don't know if that would resolve the question. Well, it would resolve the question once and for all that, yes, there is a casket under there or a crypt under there. That certainly, but it wouldn't resolve the question as to who it is until they would allow you to exhume and do some tests.
Yeah.
But, I would look forward.
He might be wearing, I keep thinking he might be wearing a ring that has the de Vere crest on it.
Oh,
and that could be easily seen. That's, my fantasy, that you could do that, and you'd see the ring, and that
or some other emblem or some other piece of jewelry or something buried with the body. That would make sense, definitely.
Exactly, something that wouldn't require digging it up. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, when we get that app, we'll also go stand between the paws of the Sphinx and try to find the hidden library that is legended to be hidden beneath right between the paws of the Sphinx as well.
All the things that we can find, all the hidden things that we can find.
Because the Egyptians would never let anyone dig there either to determine. Well, Daniel, as always, wonderful to have you, and our special treat. We thank you so much for this wonderful episode, and we will look forward to that July bonus episode that will be coming out later this month, fellow Quillers, so watch for that. Remember, you can only access our monthly bonus features by becoming a serial Quiller at our Patreon account. So if you're interested in the previous bonus features that are there already, and this one coming up with Daniel talking about Symphony number 17, go to don'tquillthepodcast.com, click on that Patreon link, and set yourself up as a serial Quiller. You'll have access to those right away. And right here, right now, to announce this month's Quiller of the Month is our own producer, Jake.
Thank you, Stephen, and hello, Quillers. 'Tis I, Jake Lloyd Bacon here, once again with the honor of naming this month's Quiller of the Month for July. If you don't know what this is, then you haven't been paying attention. You gotta pay attention. Listen, here's how it works. You head on over to Patreon. You can find the link at don'tquillthepodcast.com. Click the Patreon link, become a patron. This show is made possible by patrons. And so if you want to keep it going and support it, then you got to become a patron. And of course, if you are a noble Quiller or higher over on the Patreon, you get entered into this monthly contest. So without further ado, let's see who it's going to be. The Quiller of the Month, John Foss. John Foss, congrats on being the Quiller of the Month for the month of July. Keep an eye on your email. We'll let you know how to claim your prize. Thanks again to each and every one of you for your continued support of this program. Now back to Stephen.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it. And congratulations to our winner. I want to take a moment to say how proud I am to be the host of this podcast and part of the Dragon Wagon Radio network of programming. If you are interested in learning about what kind of items our winners receive, you can go to the swag shop at Dragon Wagon Radio. The Quiller Swag Shop is open 24 hours a day. And don't forget, Quiller Nation, you can show off your Quiller pride with a Quiller t-shirt, coffee mug, or other neat item by placing your order in the Swag Shop. Coming in future episodes, I will be speaking with an international guest who is very disheartened by the lack of motion in what we call this Oxfordian movement. He and I will discuss his astounding research, the resistance he feels he has received from established Oxfordians, and the lack of any true effort to recognize the international importance of the Shakespeare Authorship Question and more. My guest will talk about how this is not just an English-speaking world problem. In August, I will be traveling to New York to meet with one of our favorite guests, my friend Hank Whittemore. Together, Hank and I will sit down and record multiple episodes and bonus features. We're also going to be working together on his monodrama titled Shakespeare's Treason, with the goal of converting it into a piece that can be played by any actor anywhere in order to encourage productions of that play across the country. And also, my wife Annie and I are finalizing the adapted script for a staged reading of Venus and Adonis, which will soon also become a new bonus feature for you Quillers out there. And I'd like to shout out to Ernest Moncrief of Columbia, Virginia. Ernest wrote a letter to the editor of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Quarterly Newsletter back in the winter edition, encouraging such a recording of Venus and Adonis, and we are going to fulfill his wish. In his letter, he intimated that he gave a donation to the SOF earmarked for that purpose. Ernest, if you're listening, I have never heard anything further about it from them, but we're going to do it for you anyway, buddy. And I hope you received a refund for your earmarked donation. You could send that to us, however, if you go to our Patreon account. And of course, you can imagine I'm not one of the establishment's favorite people right now because I'm doing everything I can to pressure the establishment to get progressive, embrace new ideas, break out of the elitist club attitude and mentality, and create a professional, multifaceted 5-year plan for accomplishing real established goals. And that said, I'm continuously humbled by those of you who have regularly written to me to share your support, ideas, and suggestions about how to move this Oxfordian position forward in the world. Remember, Quiller Nation, you can write to me too. Send me an email to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. One more thing, loyal Quiller Tim Price sends some suggestions to fellow Quillers of a couple of podcast series out there that he thinks might provide some additional context for you listeners. Tim recommends Not Just the Tudors and Gone Medieval. So those are two different podcasts that you can find out there that sort of, connect to Elizabethan England and Shakespearean studies. So again, they are Not Just the Tudors and Gone Medieval. Thanks, Tim. I'll have to check those out. Would love to receive your ideas and comments. Send your suggestions, requests, and comments to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Let's keep this conversation going, shall we? In conclusion, I'd like to thank once again my guest, Daniel Stephen Crafts. Learn more about what Daniel is doing at www.dscrafts.net. That's crafts, crafts, like crafting, dscrafts.net. And watch for this month's bonus feature with Daniel to drop later this month. Until next time, fellow Quillers, say it with me out loud so that everyone around you can hear it. Keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.